My name is Lauren Whitaker, and until recently, I was the operations director at Heritage Craft Lumber in Asheville, North Carolina. I'm 46 years old, and I spent 12 years of my life helping turn that company around. 12 years of 500 a.m., starts weekend system audits, and after-hours phone calls with vendors just to keep things moving. When I first joined Heritage, Craft was on the brink. Disorganized supply chains, missed shipments, outdated machinery, you name it. Customers were walking away and employees were quitting in frustration. I just finished my MBA from the University of North Carolina, eager to put my training to use and build something meaningful. I began as a systems analyst, identifying bottlenecks and outdated protocols. Over time, I earned trust and responsibility, eventually stepping into the role of Director of Operations under our previous CEO, Dennis Rowe. With his support, I was able to re-engineer our entire workflow. Together, Dennis and I led a transformation. We adopted environmentally responsible harvesting practices, invested in digital inventory systems, and negotiated long-term contracts with builders across North Carolina, Georgia, and Tennessee. By year 5, our client retention rate hit 92% and production efficiency increased by 37%. We weren't just surviving, we were leading. I wasn't there for a paycheck. I was building something that mattered. And then came Bryce Holloway. The board brought him on after Dennis retired in mid-2023, touting his visionary background in disruptive innovation and brand reinvention. I tried to be optimistic. Bryce scheduled one-on-ones with every department head and praised the current systems. But the praise quickly gave way to gimmicks. He hired a team of flashy consultants with zero industry experience, obsessed with digital identity and workspace wellness. He gutted the operations budget while installing a 20,000 solar espresso machine in the executive kitchen. When I requested maintenance funds for our primary saw line, I was told it wasn't on brand. Deadlines were replaced with team yoga sessions. Substance was replaced by slogans. Still, I stayed the course. I translated his jargon into action and protected my team from the chaos. I believed foolishly that good performance would shield me, that data and loyalty would matter. I was wrong. On a quiet Friday morning in February, I was called into Bryce's office. He didn't even look me in the eye when he told me I was being let go effective immediately. My replacement, Jason Myers, his old college roommate, no experience in manufacturing. Last job, running his parents' pool cleaning business, 12 years replaced by a golf buddy with a LinkedIn account. I was told Jason shared Bryce's vision and would help modernize the company. It wasn't just insulting, it was a gut punch to everything I had spent over a decade building. The worst part, Bryce had already introduced Jason to the staff, before even telling me I was out. My severance packet was sitting in my inbox before I'd even walked back to my office. 12 years of tireless work reduced to a 2-week transition period and a vague email sent to the company announcing I was pursuing new opportunities. But what Bryce didn't know was that I had no intention of going quietly. I should have realized something was off the moment Jason Myers strolled into my office. He had that casual charm, sun-tanned skin, dazzling white smile, wearing a golf polo under a wrinkled blazer like he was late for a country club meeting. He shook my hand like I was the hotel concierge. "Lauren, great to finally meet you." "Bryce has told me so much," he said with an easy grin, like we were grabbing coffee, not like he was replacing a senior operations executive with a decade of experience. Outside the glass wall of my office, I saw Bryce watching us from the executive lounge, sipping something from a champagne flute. He lifted it slightly in my direction with a smug smile. I forced a polite nod, turned back to Jason, and did what professionals do. I gave him the tour. He didn't know the difference between kiln-dried and pressure-treated wood. He mispronounced our largest client's name and stared blankly at our inventory dashboards. This wasn't succession planning, it was corporate sabotage. As we walked the floor, I calmly explained the operational systems I'd developed over the years, our materials tracking process, our integrated vendor procurement system, our predictive staffing model. Jason scribbled half-heartedly into a leather-bound notebook, never once asking a follow-up. I asked where he'd worked before. He shrugged. "My folks own a pool cleaning business." I ran that for a bit. Completely different industry, but he added with a laugh, "Hey, business. Is business right?" I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled tightly and nodded. That afternoon, I passed the executive lounge and heard them laughing. Jason's voice was unmistakable. "She's still explaining the systems like I'm actually gonna use them." Then Bryce replied, low but clear, "Board doesn't know yet. Let's get Lauren out first. Then we pitch it as a cost-saving shift." I froze. They were planning to gut the entire department, my team, and outsource it to some firm that didn't know the first thing about our business. Even worse, they were hiding it from the board, twisting the narrative into some clever, cost-saving initiative, when in reality, it was all about control. Jason hadn't been brought in to run operations. He was there to nod along and give Bryce cover. That night, I sat in my office staring at the updated operations manual I'd spent the entire afternoon preparing for him. I couldn't believe it. 12 years of systems metrics and loyalty reduced to a smokescreen for a quiet takeover. I had trained the man who was about to burn it all down. I was furious, yes, but underneath that was something more powerful: responsibility. My team counted on me. Our vendors trusted the protocols I'd spent years refining. Clients had built long-term plans around our systems. If Bryce's outsourcing scheme moved forward, it wouldn't just mean layoffs. It would disrupt delivery timelines, compromise our sustainability compliance, and put our contract sum with federal forestry agencies at serious risk. He wasn't just ousting me. He was destabilizing the foundation of the entire company. The next morning, HR sent a curt reminder to sign my severance agreement. It came with a suffocating confidentiality clause, no mention of the outsourcing plan, no reference to Jason's appointment, and certainly no acknowledgement that he was already making decisions without knowing a thing about our operations. I didn't sign. Instead, I got to work. I combed through archived board communications and reviewed internal approvals. What I found disturbed me. In the break room, I casually asked accounting about recent vendor changes. That's when I learned Bryce's brother-in-law had just been named purchasing director at Blue Ridge Build Co., one of our top clients. The two had gone golfing just last weekend. Coincidence? Not a chance. By noon, I uncovered a draft contract showing preferential terms, pricing 15% below market, guaranteed material access during peak shortages. We'd never offered that to anyone, no matter how long they'd been with us. Bryce wasn't just mismanaging heritage craft. He was using it as a personal chessboard. And if nobody stepped in, the company wouldn't crash from lack of profit, but from rot on the inside. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. Jason and Bryce weren't modernizing. They were gutting the company's core while handing sweetheart deals to friends. The Blue Ridge contract was just the beginning. I found whispers of two more, one tied to Bryce's former business partner, another to a man who hosted his wedding. All three had below-market rates, extended terms, and most dangerously, preferred supply guarantees that violated our internal compliance hierarchy. And all of it cloaked under the banner of innovation. If this story moved, you stick around, hit that subscribe button, and be the first to hear what happened next. Because the real journey didn't end here. It just found a new beginning. That last clause was the most dangerous. In the lumber industry, raw material allocation during shortages follows strict internal protocols. We prioritize long-term clients based on order volume, reliability, and payment history. Offering guaranteed supply to an outside company for personal gain wasn't just unethical. It could spark legal action if it interfered with our ability to meet other contractual obligations. Even worse, none of these deals were traceable to any formal board approval. When Bryce was hired, he made all the right promises: transparency, accountability, and a deep respect for our sustainability commitments. But when I reviewed the archived board meeting minutes, there was nothing. No votes on outsourcing. No documentation of contract restructuring. No mention of executive realignment. That's when everything clicked. This wasn't poor management. It was a calculated cover-up. And I was the one thing standing in their way. So I got strategic. I began documenting everything quietly and meticulously. Every conversation. Every strange directive. Every moment Jason said something careless or contradictory, I used my remaining system access to backup reports, internal memos, even performance dashboards I suspected might soon be altered. But by Thursday morning, the walls started closing in. I arrived at work to find my email credentials disabled. IT informed me quietly that it had come directly from Bryce in anticipation of your early departure. I wasn't even allowed to send a goodbye message. It was crystal clear they didn't want me seeing anything else during what little remained of my so-called transition. Thankfully, I wasn't entirely cut off. Eric, my assistant of 7 years, still had access. When I explained the situation, he didn't flinch. "You always told me to keep backups," he said, pulling a flash drive from his desk drawer. So I did. Consulting contracts, drafted pricing terms, client allocation schedules, all of it right there in my hand. I stared at him stunned. "You kept all this?" I asked. "You trained me to be thorough," he replied with a small shrug. I plugged the drive into my laptop and started digging. And what I found was worse than I'd feared. The outsourcing proposal was a logistical nightmare waiting to unfold. The consulting firm Bryce had chosen had zero background in timber supply chains. The savings he kept touting, based on omitting costs like onboarding retraining and system integration delays. Worse still, there were massive gaps in compliance. The proposal didn't address how the firm would maintain our environmental certifications, replanting metrics, or carbon offset tracking, all core pillars of our brand. If implemented, the plan wouldn't just fail, it would violate binding sustainability agreements and expose us to lawsuits, revoke certifications, and a public relations disaster. It was all sitting in plain sight, and Bryce was trying to bulldoze it through before anyone had a chance to object. There was no doubt left. He was deliberately misleading the board systematically, covertly, and using someone who didn't even understand the stakes to help cover his tracks. Jason didn't need to know the business. He was just there to smile, nod, and stay out of the way, while Bryce made the real decisions behind closed doors. But what Bryce didn't count on was this: I wasn't going to disappear quietly. That night, I called Ellen Ramsay, one of the few board members I trusted. She had been a close advisor to our former CEO, Dennis Rowe. I laid it all out, everything: the sweetheart contracts, the bogus consultant proposal, the access restrictions, the breaches of governance. Her response was instant. "You need proof," she said. "Documents, emails, contracts, signed directives." "I have them," I replied. "Then I want you at the next board meeting," she said without hesitation. "I'll list you as a guest speaker for continuity planning. But be ready. Bryce will try to shut this down. And when he senses you're a threat, things will move fast." She was right. The next morning, I walked into my office and found Jason already inside, rifling through my desk drawers. "Just getting familiar," he said with a smug grin. "Sounds like your last day might come sooner than expected." The walls were closing in, but I had everything I needed to tear them down. I knew I had only one chance. Move too soon, and Bryce would destroy the paper trail. Wait too long, and I'd be escorted out before I could speak up. So I played along. That same morning, Bryce called me into his office. He was calm, self-satisfied, like a man who thought he'd already won. "Lauren," he said, interlacing his fingers, "we've decided to end your transition early. Effective immediately." I blinked slowly, feigning surprise. "Is there a reason?" He offered a faint smile. "It's clear you're not fully aligned with the new direction. We think it's best to close this chapter cleanly." He slid a revised severance agreement across the desk. This one had an even more aggressive non-disparagement clause and a veiled threat sign today. "Or walk away with nothing." "I understand," I said quietly. "I'll review it and get back to you before the end of the day." That was the lie he needed to hear. Back in my office, I packed my belongings slowly, deliberately. I kept my expression neutral, letting Bryce and Jason think they'd won. Jason even walked by holding a latte, smirking. "Tough day, huh?" he quipped. "Tough year," I replied coolly. By noon, I had slipped Ellen a message through her personal email. "We're moving. I'll be ready for the board meeting." I have everything I typed and hit send. Ellen replied with a single line: "I've arranged your access." At exactly 2:15 p.m., just as I was quietly preparing To walk out of the building with my dignity and a cardboard box of belongings, I passed the conference room. Jason was on the phone speaking louder than he probably realized. "Yeah, she's cleared out," he said, casually. "She suspects nothing. The outsourcing launch is full steam ahead." A pause. "The board will see the strategy after we've started implementation. Bryce says they'll have no choice but to go along." It took everything in me not to step in and slam the door shut behind me. But I didn't. I let it stay open. Let him believe I was gone. Let him believe I'd given up. That evening, I met Ellen at a small cafe just outside Asheville. She laid out the plan. The board's executive committee had agreed to hear me off the record. No promises, but at least a chance to be heard. "You're still listed as a transition consultant," she explained. "You'll have access for a few more days. No drama, no noise, just bring the facts." "I will." I nodded. The next morning, I walked into the office in flats and a gray blazer. No heels, no confrontation. Just calm resolve. While Jason stumbled through a sustainability review and couldn't explain our replanting commitments, I kept gathering. Eric had already backed up the pricing files and consulting proposals. I sorted the evidence by date, marked every policy breach, and assembled a deck that was simple, factual, and bulletproof. Bryce thought I was gone. Jason thought I didn't matter. That was their first mistake. The day of the executive committee meeting felt like any other. Bryce strutted through the office like a man already celebrating a win. Jason trailed behind him, playing sidekick, clueless but confident. I entered the building quietly, escorted by James Werner, the board chair himself. He met me at the security desk. "Ellen filled me in," he said under his breath. "You'll get 5 minutes, just the facts." "You'll have them," I replied, gripping the folder in my hand. Upstairs, the executive boardroom felt colder than usual. Polished glass walls. 10 chairs, only a few filled. Bryce was already seated, Jason beside him, both visibly tense the moment I walked in. Their expressions said it all. They weren't expecting me, and they definitely weren't ready. Ellen sat across from them, flanked by 2 other executive committee members. Lauren, Bryce said, feigning surprise. "I wasn't aware you were invited to this meeting." "She's here at my request," James replied firmly. Given the recent concerns regarding operational changes, I believe her insight is not only relevant but essential. Bryce's jaw tightened slightly. Jason's eyes flicked toward the exit like he was hoping to disappear. "Let's begin," James said, nodding toward me. I stood, opened the folder in my hands, and took a steady breath. For the past 12 years, I've overseen every operational system within Heritage Craft Lumber I began. What I'm about to present are structural changes currently underway that not only contradict the company's stated sustainability goals, but also violate board governance protocols and expose us to major legal and financial risk. I started with the consultant agreement showing how Bryce's outsourcing plan had bypassed board approval. I pointed to critical oversights, zero compliance procedures, no structured onboarding and transition costs, hidden as long-term savings. One chart compared current operational costs with the proposed model, factoring in penalties, missed deadlines, retraining, and risk exposure. The result? A net cost increase of nearly 18%. Bryce, who had promised sweeping cost reductions, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I moved to the client contracts, Blue Ridge Build Co., along with 2 others. All 3 featured terms we'd never offered to even our most loyal clients: below market pricing, extended payment windows, and priority supply guarantees during material shortages. Then came the final pages. Each of those 3 companies had personal ties to Bryce. One run by his brother-in-law, another by a former business partner, and the third by the man who hosted his wedding. These preferential deals jeopardize our standing with key accounts, violate internal allocation policies, and risk breaching our federally recognized supply ethics agreements, I said firmly. The room went silent. Then I dropped the final piece, an email from Bryce to Jason. A direct instruction to begin outsourcing before presenting it to the board. So by the time they see it, it's already too late to object. I read aloud, then slid printed copies across the table. No spin. No commentary, just facts. James reviewed the document slowly, his expression darkening. Ellen stared hard at Bryce, her lips pressed into a tight line. Bryce James said finally, "Is this accurate?" Bryce leaned forward defensive. "This is a gross mischaracterization. Lauren is clearly bitter about her departure and is twisting things to damage my reputation." "The documents speak for themselves," I interrupted calmly. "Every number, every directive time-stamped and digitally verified. This isn't personal. It's governance." Jason looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. Ellen finally spoke. "Bryce, you've made sweeping changes to core operations without board authorization. You've exposed the company to compliance violations and you've funneled contracts to individuals in your personal circle. That's not innovation. That's misconduct." "I was going to present all of it at the next full board meeting," Bryce insisted, his voice tight. "No," James replied, voice flat. "You were going to bury us in paperwork and hope we'd rubber stamp it after the damage was irreversible." Then he turned to me. "Lauren, thank you. Please wait outside while we deliberate." I nodded and stepped out of the boardroom. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the sheer adrenaline of finally confronting everything head on. I had done what I came to do. The rest was in their hands. 30 minutes later, James returned. "Bryce has been terminated, effective immediately," he said. "Jason will not assume any leadership role. The outsourcing plan has been rescinded in full." I nodded, fighting back the wave of emotion that swelled in my chest. "We'll also be conducting an audit of all executive decisions made since Bryce was hired," James added. "You've helped this company dodge a disaster we may never have recovered from." The fallout came swiftly. That very afternoon, Bryce was escorted from the building by corporate security. No farewell speech, no applause, just a silent walk down the hallway as stunned employees looked on. I didn't witness it, but Eric later told me that Bryce didn't even clear out his office. He left behind his custom nameplate, his $2,500 espresso machine, and the illusion that he'd ever been in control. Jason didn't last much longer. Once the board realized he had no operational qualifications and had knowingly played a role in the cover-up, he was quietly removed from the premises. He didn't even finish his coffee. Last I heard, he'd returned to California pitching himself as a strategic consultant and blaming his exit on a difference in vision. But in this industry, reputations don't heal easily. No one was buying it. The board moved quickly. All preferential contracts were suspended pending a legal review. The consultant agreement was shredded before it could move forward. Ellen personally led the charge to restore transparency and rebuild trust in the operational review process. James, initially reluctant to open a full audit, changed his mind once more. Questionable expenses under Bryce's name surfaced, including luxury dinners that never included clients. Internally, the company was rattled, but grateful. My old team reached out with quiet messages of support and relief. The systems I had built, the very ones Bryce tried to dismantle, were still standing. In fact, the very systems Bryce had tried to erase were now being used as the benchmark for how heritage craft lumber should move forward, sustainable, efficient, and built on experience, not ego. A few days later, James and Ellen invited me back to the office. This time, I was seated at the head of the boardroom table. "We'd like you to return," James said. "Full authority over operations, a compensation adjustment, whatever you need." It was a moment I had once imagined during the worst of the transition when I feared everything I'd built was gone. But now that it was real, something shifted inside me. "I'm honored," I said, "but I think it's time for me to move on." They both looked surprised. "I've had 2 offers in the past week," I explained, "and I think I need a clean start. But I'm willing to stay for a structured transition, stabilize the team, onboard the right person, and ensure there's no drop in momentum." Ellen nodded, a quiet gesture of respect. "We'll make that arrangement." Over the next 3 months, I stayed on as a strategic consultant, restoring team morale, addressing critical gaps, and helping the board implement long-term safeguards. When I finally walked out of that building, it was on my terms, with my legacy intact and my reputation even stronger. As for Bryce, he tried to stir trouble on his way out. He threatened legal action, accused me of leaking confidential materials, and sent one final bitter email to the board. James replied with one line: "Any legal inquiry will trigger a full audit of all decisions made during your tenure." We never heard from him again. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it comes in quiet meetings, firm handshakes, and the sound of a closing door behind someone who thought they were untouchable. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do when someone tries to erase you is prove you were never replaceable in the first place. About 2 weeks after my formal exit, just as I was settling into a slower rhythm and planning my next chapter, I received a call from a journalist. She introduced herself as a senior writer covering corporate governance and sustainability in manufacturing. "We've received a packet of internal documents," she said. "They outline questionable contracts and strategic moves under Bryce Holloway. Your name came up as someone who might have insight." "I'm no longer with the company," I replied evenly. "I understand," she said. "Off the record, thank you for your time. I hadn't leaked anything, but someone had. And I didn't ask questions. Some stories are better told in silence." The article dropped 4 days later. Vision or Exploitation: The Rise and Fall of a Timber Executive. It exploded. The journalist had done her homework thoroughly. She cited interviews with anonymous employees, included financial comparisons, and most damning of all, revealed that Bryce had a history of similar misconduct at his previous company. Turns out Heritage Craft wasn't the first place he tried to modernize by gutting seasoned teams and funneling contracts to close associates. It was just the first place where someone had stopped him before the damage became irreversible. The article went viral across the industry. Executives shared it on LinkedIn. Clients called Heritage Craft demanding clarification. 2 of the companies tied to Bryce's sweetheart deals saw immediate reputational fallout. One lost a valuable state construction partnership. The other had its federal contract flagged for review. And Bryce gone. Blacklisted. He issued a brief denial through a lawyer claiming the allegations were exaggerated, but it barely made a ripple. His name, once tossed around in leadership forums as forward-thinking, was now shorthand for everything wrong with ego-driven management. As for Jason, he quietly disappeared. No updates, no job postings, no fresh titles on LinkedIn. The word going around was that he moved back to California for an extended career break. And me, I just signed a contract as director of operations for a sustainable building materials firm breaking into engineered timber. They'd followed the Heritage Craft story closely and reached out after the article. They weren't just impressed by my track record, they respected my integrity. "We don't just need someone who understands systems," the CEO told me. "We need someone who can lead through storms." It was the kind of validation I didn't even know I needed. Even better, over the next few months, 5 members of my former team joined me. Engineers, analysts, project leads. People I had mentored, trusted, and built alongside. Together, we were creating something new. Rooted not in buzzwords or shortcuts, but in values. Bryce had tried to erase transparency, accountability, and long-term vision. Back at Heritage Craft, the dust settled. The board stepped up, instituted new oversight protocols, and recommitted to the sustainability model that had once made us an industry leader. I continued consulting quietly from the sidelines, not for praise, but because I still cared about the company I'd helped shape. Looking back now, I realized this wasn't a story about revenge. It was about legacy, what you do when someone tries to erase yours. Because sometimes the loudest statement isn't made through conflict. It's made through clarity. Through standing tall, walking away on your terms, and letting your work speak louder than any title or severance check ever could. If you've ever been underestimated, replaced, or pushed aside after years of loyalty, then you already know this story isn't just mine. It belongs to every person who's been quietly holding things together and watching someone else take the credit. If my story spoke to you, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment, tell me where you're tuning in from, and whether you've ever had to defend your own legacy. Your voice matters here. I didn't fight back with anger. I fought back with truth, with preparation, and with integrity. And that's what I hope you take away. You don't have to raise your voice to be powerful. You just have to know your worth and refuse to let anyone write you out of your own story. Let's build a community that supports people who do the right thing even when it's hard. Share this video if you know someone who needs a reminder that they're not alone. And if you believe in standing your ground with grace, hit that like button. And if you want more real stories like this, stories of strength, strategy, and redemption, don't forget to subscribe. This journey isn't over, and I'd love to have you with me for the next chapter.